In this second half of the class, we're going to talk about the economic ties and the current tensions between both sides of the Atlantic. When we talk about economic ties, is something that I've already mentioned before in the previous video, is how connected these two economies are more than any other two economies in the world. When we talk about the US and the European Union, we talk about 46% of the world GDP, while we're only talking about 11% of the world's population. I mean, this is something obvious. Obviously, you know that these two regions are the two most developed regions in the world. We're talking about 1/3 of goods trades, of how much we trade in terms of manufactured goods. And also we're talking about 50% of foreign direct investment. This is a term that I'm going to explain later, and you will see it's very important to the dynamics of the economy and relates quite closely to the strength and the trust in the economy. So what I'm saying here is these two economies are quite connected. If you're talking about trading partners for the US, the main trading partner in the world for the United States, it's the European Union. More than China, more than Mexico, more than Canada, more than any other country in the world is the European Union, both in terms of exports and imports. Actually, the trade balance, and this is something that Donald Trump has mentioned quite a few times, is not as big as with China. And actually, the trade deficit per se doesn't have to be negative. This isn't true. Actually, when we analyze the trade balance between the European Union and the United States does have a trade deficit with the European Union. However, it has a goods trade deficit while it has a service trade surplus. And actually, when you analyze the added value of both of these trading categories, you will see that actually services provide more added value and actually benefits the economy. You're just not exporting manufactured goods, you're exporting expertise, you're exporting know-how by the end of the day. So actually, as you can see, the trade balance is not dramatic as it is in a sense with China. So you're not that dependent of that economy. But actually, yes, you have a good deficit with the European Union, but you have a service surplus with the European Union. And this has been like that for quite some long time. Actually, when we're talking about sectors, this might be a bit shocking, but actually the sector where we Europeans export the most to the United States, it's pharmaceuticals and chemicals. This is a sector that is not normally mentioned, but it's actually quite important. And actually nowadays, in times of crisis, even more important. Actually, I don't know if you remember a few days ago, Donald Trump was trying to buy a potential vaccine for the virus from a German company. Laboratories in Europe are quite common. There are also quite a few American ones. For example, Johnson & Johnson is an American one, but we're talking about Roche, we're talking about Pfizer, we're talking about Bayer, we're talking actually Novartis is shared, and Sanofi is Swiss. So actually we're talking quite an important sector that we don't normally realize that is that large in terms of how much does it mean in the market share. So pharmaceuticals and chemicals on top of that scale before, then aerospace, before the motor vehicles, etc. etc. So actually when we're talking about services, I mean here we're talking about consultancy, we're talking about banking services, and actually the service hub of the European Union was the United Kingdom. And this is a process that we'll have to adopt because most of these services came from the city and they will have to move on to other places. We're talking about Amsterdam, we're talking about Frankfurt, we're talking about Paris as potential candidates to take all the business that London is going to lose because of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. This is a topic that if we were in class we could discuss now because obviously it actually impacts Brexit to a great extent, how this is going to affect the service market and how that's going to affect the relation with the United States. If we talk about foreign direct investment, now how you have to understand it is how much, nowadays we're talking about, I mean back in the day Marshall Plan, this obviously was a state, but now when we're talking about foreign direct investment nowadays, we're talking about companies investing money into another country. So for example, one of the companies we had before, for example Bayer or Mercedes, they want to open a plant in the United States to produce there, so you don't have to ship all the production from Europe to the United States. This is what we talk about foreign direct investment because by the end of the day, Bayer, a German company, is putting money into the American economy and is dynamizing the American economy. And this only happens if, what we're saying here, if there's a business-friendly climate that attracts investment. And foreign direct investment is very important. It's interesting because here we don't have the data till 2016. Still, I mean, the last data we have on foreign direct investment is from 2018. It was still growing, however, it was decelerating. And obviously that has to do with the current administration. and the impact it has had in the economy and how diverse the views on the economy they are. And this is what we're going to be talking about, America first. And obviously this is something that Trump promised in the campaign. And where all this started? All this started soon after Trump took office. He imposed a tariff. A tariff, by the end of the day, is paying extra money because of buying a good abroad. And this started with steel and aluminium. Why was Trump able to do this? Because if you remember from previous classes when we talked about WTO, this goes against the principles and rules of WTO. But WTO rules do have exceptions. And the exception Trump used in this case was national security. Steel and aluminum are they are strategic goods for the military industry in the United States. So that's why Trump justified imposing tariffs on these two goods. How did the European Union respond to this? They responded with retaliation and tariffs. So they put tariffs on specific goods. I think I mentioned this in class as well. For example, Harley Davidson was one of the companies that got hit. We talked also, I think, if I remember well, was oranges. Most of them were products coming from states that were competitive, where Trump could not afford losing votes, looking actually to 2020 elections. What else did the European Union do? They actually put up a consultation on WTO. As the WTO, has a conciliation process in WTO, a problem-solving process. So brought the case before the WTO. Obviously, this is a slow case, and it will take time for WTO to solve whether Trump had the right to put tariffs on these goods or not. And last, safeguards investigation. By the end of the day, trying to protect the European economy, put safeguards to try to help these producers in Europe of steel and aluminum. And this has continued. I mean, this was the first case of tariffs, but there are a few other fields that have joined aluminum and steel. Actually, with here Spain, we talked about olive oil. We talked also about, I think, wine was also included. So quite a few goods have now entered this list where tariffs have been reintroduced. So if we talk about the approach to trade nowadays, can we say that they are very different? Yes, they are absolutely different. And this is not the only example. And this is not exaggerated by the media whatsoever. This is an absolute reality. For example, the US also withdrew from Trans-Pacific Partnership. Actually, there's a press conference of Barack Obama talking about Trans-Pacific Partnership that is hilarious. That's when he talks about the Iron Man. But just look for that on Google, on YouTube. It's absolutely worth it. But the US, the free trade agreements, those agreements aiming to get rid of the barriers to trade. The Donald Trump administration have halted all the conversations, but one that we're going to mention later. And the European Union is advancing in the opposite direction. It's actually close to signing new free trade agreements with Japan, with Canada, with Vietnam, with South American countries, etc., etc. So, actually, this has a lot to do with the previous class. For Europe, the solution to the problems is always trade, is always diplomacy, is always soft power, while the US has a different approach to foreign affairs. So very divergent approaches to trade. This does not mean that the links are not strong, it's just that they have different strategies when talking about this issue. And last, we're going to talk about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. This was a project started in 2013 that aimed to enhance market access, kind of a free trade agreement, even taking it a step further than that it was already. So what areas will this affect? On the first place, agriculture. Actually, Europe does have tariffs and actually blocks the access to American agricultural products based on health and safety regulations. And they were working on kind of relaxing this prohibition. Also, open service and government procurement, so American companies could compete on procurement projects in Europe and the other way around. Convergent regulation. Actually, I don't know if you remember when we were talking about the single market, when we were talking about the European Union history, we said that one of the most important parts was actually converging all the legislation in every country, regulating the same way, same things regarding trade. And this is very important because actually this affects foreign direct investment, actually gives trust to investors, and it creates a positive climate for investing by the end of the day. And last but not least, a few areas where we're going to strengthen this cooperation as intellectual property, digital trade, and investment. Actually, digital trade is something very interesting because the European Union was now. Well, we're going to talk about that in a second. Sorry. And what happened in Europe when we were negotiating this trade partnership? Actually, people opposed it. The general public were against this partnership. Why? Because the European Union conducted the negotiations with secrecy. We didn't really know what was going on behind closed doors. Also, because this could have a big impact on European agriculture. And remember that agriculture is still a very important part of the European Union. In France, in Spain, in quite a few other countries. And common agricultural policy is still the one that takes the biggest chunk of the European Union budget. And last but not least, because they think that actually these will benefit multinationals, but leave workers behind. This was a treaty for the companies and not for the people. I sound like Bernie Sanders right now. Okay, so and you can see that there were demonstrations all around Europe, and actually this was a coordinated effort in many European capital cities. So what did the Trump administration do with the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership? They actually limited the scope. They did not get rid of it as a Trans-Pacific partnership, but they actually limited. And actually to those last areas that we were talking about, digital, intellectual property, etc., etc. At the first time in place, they solved the negotiations, but then actually limited the scope. So last but not least, how does the European Union see Donald Trump? It's interesting, because we need to understand each other. We saw the economic ties between both sides of the Atlantic and are absolutely necessary. So on the one hand, actually this was, you've seen Jean-Claude Juncker. He said that Trump was a significant challenge himself. He said that actually negotiating with Trump was negotiating on the Arrogant, we need rebalancing, but at the end of the day, it's worth a try. It's worth a try because the economic ties between both sides of the Atlantic are so strong that both sides of the Atlantic need one of each other. When we're talking about hard power, there's a clear imbalance. Actually, when we're talking about economy, both economies are head-to-head. Actually, the European economy is slightly bigger than American economy, but by the end of the day, we're talking about 28 European countries. Well, we're talking about one single country. But by the end of the day, European countries and the US need to understand each other when talking about trade because we depend on it for our living. So, okay, if you have any question about what I've exposed today here, just drop me an email, go through the readings, because on Friday, you have to take the pop quiz. See you guys, have a nice one, bye!